Hello, I'm Doug Silliman, president of the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, and I'd like to welcome you to our discussion of the major issues facing the Gulf Arab states and the United States in 2022. We've pulled together AGSIW's Brain Trust to give you an advanced look at our priorities for research and analysis in the coming year. As always, you can find AGSIW's work in both English and Arabic online through our website, agsiw.org. You can also sign up through our website to get our weekly newsletter, The Dow. One of the issues on which I will be focusing this year is the evolution of the defense relationship between the United States and the Gulf Arab states. This evolution is taking place in the context of increasing multipolarity as other global players, China, Russia, and increasingly European countries like France, seek to expand their influence in this historically American-dominated area. While I do not expect significant change in 2022, we will be keeping a close eye on developments through AGSIW's ongoing series of programs and written analysis entitled Refining the U.S. Force Posture in the Gulf.
As we shape our programs and publications over the coming year here at AGSIW, I'll be keeping my eye on three major themes or developments. First is the evolution of what I call the great debate in the U.S., but also out in the region over the proper U.S. security architecture and force posture for the Gulf. This debate will be shaped by Gulf expectations and also perceptions out there that the U.S. is already disengaging. But I think the reality is quite different, and we will remain with a strong presence out in the region. The second theme I want to look at has to do with what I call Gulf retrenchment from conflict and previous interventions in the region, whether it's the intra-GCC conflict, now resolved, the conflict in Syria, Libya, to some degree in Yemen, and in other areas. We will continue to try to cover a lot of these areas. I served in Syria, and I will focus on that in particular and do some writing on it. And the third theme I wanted to mention has to do with fatigue out in the region with the American model in the Gulf. It's a model based on longstanding diplomatic and military presence out there, commercial activity, and the prospect of first-rate technology and higher education. But there's also maybe a lecturing aspect that has developed over the last decade that has made it less appealing. Chinese and Russian models are now competing for influence out there. We'll follow all of these developments in the coming year.
What we'll be looking at for 2022 is to see whether the new era of de-escalation, of consolidation, retrenchment, and maneuver, as I've called it, that began a little bit before, but especially during 2021, can gain solidity, become institutionalized, and get protected from the kind of shocks and disruptions that could throw the region back into a period of confrontation and even conflict. And I think we need to look at the ways in which these different de-escalations have gone. Some of them are more solid than others. The UAE-Israeli partnership clearly is strategic. It's not going anywhere. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. With the Turkish Gulf rapprochement, with the UAE and now Saudi Arabia, you're looking at a rapprochement that could become institutionalized through commerce, through investments, through infrastructure that would reduce the options, especially of Turkey, but of all parties, to go back to confrontation and become more aggressive again. And it could become protected from the shocks that could drive us back into confrontation. With Iran Gulf outreach, I think it's much more tenuous. Clearly, they haven't made much progress, especially with Saudi Arabia. And also the JCPOA negotiations are very tenuous and could fail, leading to the creation of a containment regime against Iran. And also Iran's network of militia armed gangs in neighboring countries like Iraq and Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Bahrain, and elsewhere are obviously a tripwire that could easily start another confrontation. So that looks the weakest. So I think what we'll be following is the extent to which all of this can become institutionalized and protected from the kinds of disruption that could send us back into an era of confrontation.
The year 2021 ended on a very optimistic note, with Iran and the United Arab Emirates, and to some extent Saudi Arabia, de-escalating. I am not entirely sure that it is possible to sustain de-escalation between these countries because of the fact that the crisis over Iran's nuclear program between Iran and the United States is not resolved, and there is no resolution in sight. In other words, whenever the Islamic Republic wants to get attention from the United States, it's quite possible that Iran will be attacking interests of the Arab countries to get United States attention. This is why I unfortunately must admit that I am expecting more crisis in the coming year and do not believe that de-escalation will be the dominant theme of the new year.
I will be looking more this year at developments in Iraq's democracy. Iraq, under pressure from massive street protests, held early parliamentary elections last October. The party of clerical firebrand Muqtada al-Sadr won the largest block of seats and appears in a strong position to lead formation of the new government. Sadr has pledged to form what he calls a national majority government with an opposition outside of government for the first time since at least 2003. If there is a majority government, you may see an emboldened youth protest movement, the weakening of the political factions aligned with Iran-supported militias if they end up in the opposition, and possibly a government more focused on governance than on the division of the spoils of power. Much of this will play out in 2022.
So in 2022, I'm going to be looking at three trends that have really been growing in the domestic politics of the Gulf. The first two are linked, and that's the consolidation of power at the top within ruling families and ruling lines, where we much more see power concentrated in one individual who's seeking to pass power on to his direct line or son in most cases. The second and related one then is the centralization of power within the state. And we see this being much more of a national power now, really cloaked in the veil of nationalism, and that being used to both encourage this loyalty to this individual at the top, but also to really demand much more from Gulf individuals. They're really expected, the citizenry now, to contribute in much more varied ways within the state. The third trend then also related is the sidelining of traditional elites that used to mediate between whether the power and the citizens, whether that be religious establishment, tribal leaders, or even private sector elites or old merchant elites, which are really facing many more demands these days, both by the state and also facing some of the ire from the public in the form of new populist movements, which will be another thing I'll be tracking. Another thing we really want to look at this institute is to take a deeper look at Saudi Arabia and how the new institutions established under the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, now coming into power about 5 years, are really working. And so we'll be doing a lot of deep dive in Saudi politics, society, and also new cultural trends.
My political economy research at AGSIW this year will be informed by three trends. First, the economic recoveries in Gulf states remain fragile. Oil prices are staying higher for longer, but ongoing coronavirus concerns, especially new variants like Omicron, pose major challenges for the non-oil economies of the region. Second, regional economic competition is here to stay. The primary theater to watch involves the development trajectories of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the two largest economies in the GCC. As all of the GCC states continue to adapt the non-oil segments of their economies to a rapidly evolving world, competition is likely to get fierce. Third, external economic partnerships are critical to short-term recovery efforts, but also longer-term development trends. China is the big economic player to watch here, and a good deal of AGSIW's political economy research intends to shed a light on China's multifaceted engagement with the Gulf region.